Welcome to True Echo, where every story reveals more than just truth, it reveals the heartbeat of justice. Today we bring you a shocking and emotional tale of quiet strength, hidden power, and the devastating cost of prejudice. One woman's dignity was trampled at 30,000 feet, but what happened next stunned the world and changed an entire company forever. Stay with us. Rachel Carter stepped into the Denver airport with the quiet grace of someone used to going unnoticed. She liked it that way. Her ivory linen dress, simple flats, and worn leather backpack didn't turn heads, which was exactly what she preferred. She wasn't interested in attention, even though she was married to one of the most powerful men in the tech world, Ethan Carter, billionaire CEO of Ether Air, the very airline she was about to board. Rachel had helped build Ether Air from the ground up, shaping its inclusive policies and corporate culture. But you wouldn't know it from looking at her. She wasn't adorned with designer labels or trailed by assistants. Her only accessory was a silver bracelet, a keepsake from her grandmother who had taught her early on that true worth had nothing to do with wealth or skin color. Today she simply wanted a quiet trip to Seattle, time to think, to breathe, away from boardrooms and media attention. But her peace was about to be shattered. At the gate for first-class boarding, a young blonde agent named Claire gave her a brief smile that faltered the moment her eyes took in Rachel's modest appearance. There was a slight pause, barely a second, but Rachel noticed. She always noticed. Claire's fingers tapped hesitantly on her keyboard, her eyes flicking from Rachel's dress to her shoes to her backpack. "Can you confirm your full name?" she asked, overly polite but tinged with something else, something colder. "Rachel Carter," Rachel replied gently. Claire's eyebrows knit together. "One moment, please." She stared at the screen as if looking for a reason to deny the ticket. Behind Rachel, a sharp male voice rang out. "Your seat is back in economy, ma'am." Rachel turned to see a tall man in a navy suit, his expression tight with disapproval, a Rolex catching the light as he crossed his arms. His voice was full of that familiar disdain Rachel had grown up with. Claire smirked faintly at the man's comment and Rachel caught it, a flash of cruelty trying to hide behind professionalism. But Rachel didn't flinch. She stood there quietly watching, waiting. Claire's fingers resumed tapping and after a long moment she muttered, "Miss Rachel Carter. C2A. You may board." Rachel smiled with quiet dignity and took her ticket. But as she walked through the gate, her steps were a little heavier. That familiar weight of judgment had settled over her once again. The difference was, this time it was happening on the airline she helped build. Inside the first-class cabin, things went from bad to worse. The atmosphere turned icy the moment she entered. Rachel took in the polished leather seats, the subtle scent of lavender designed to soothe. But none of that could soften the stares. Then came the voice. A loud, cutting one from across the aisle. "Who let a country black woman in here? She looks like she walked straight out of the ghetto." Rachel turned slowly. A woman in her 40s, draped in a silk dress and expensive gold jewelry, was glaring at her. Vanessa Reed. She looked Rachel up and down with open contempt. Beside her, another man laughed cruelly, and a woman nearby started filming with her phone, giggling as she whispered something hateful to the camera. The taunts escalated. "Pretending to be rich, huh? Probably saved up for a year just to sit here. Must be her first time flying first class." Rachel said nothing. She walked to her seat, 2A, and sat down, placing her book in her lap and resting her hand gently on her grandmother's bracelet. Her fingers trembled. Not from fear. From pain. She had known prejudice her entire life. But here, on her own airline, in a cabin meant to represent comfort and equality, this was different. This was betrayal. She had written the diversity training manuals. She had signed off on every anti-discrimination policy. And now she was being ridiculed in the very sanctuary she had tried to build. She closed her eyes and steadied her breath. She wouldn't react, not now. But she would remember every word, every face, every whisper. Because this flight wasn't going to end the way they expected. She didn't know it yet, but this humiliating moment was only the beginning. And by the time the plane landed, the world would know exactly who Rachel Carter was. Rachel kept her eyes focused on the leather-bound novel in her lap, but she hadn't turned a single page. The words blurred beneath the weight of the ridicule that still echoed around her. She could feel it, the buzz of whispered laughter, the disdain dripping from the glances shot her way like arrows. And then came another blow. Miranda Kane, the head flight attendant, arrived at her seat with two junior crew members, Tracy and Logan, flanking her like enforcers. Miranda's polished exterior, tight bun, and icy blue eyes exuded authority. But the look she gave Rachel was anything but professional. "There's been a mistake," Miranda said loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. "You can't possibly be a VIP guest. Your seat is in economy. 32C. Rachel looked up slowly. "Please check again. I believe this is my ticket." Her voice was calm, measured, even as the tightness in her chest intensified. Miranda barely glanced at the ticket before shaking her head. Tracy crossed her arms with a smug smirk, and Logan took a menacing step forward as if preparing for a confrontation. "You have two choices," Logan said, voice low and threatening. "Either move to economy quietly, or we'll call airport security." Rachel looked around. Not a single passenger intervened. No one asked for fairness. Some had their phones out, recording. Others simply watched, entertained. Her throat tightened, but she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She stood. With grace. With dignity. She picked up her worn backpack, nodded politely, and walked back toward the economy section, her posture proud even as her heart sank with every step. As she crossed through the partition, she heard Miranda whisper behind her, "I can't believe she had the nerve to pretend she belonged here." Tracy and Logan laughed. The cabin joined in. Rachel clenched her fists as she walked, eyes forward, back straight. But the humiliation burned. Each chuckle felt like a slap. Each comment, a gash. "Where do people like her get the idea they belong in first class?" a man muttered as she passed. "She probably forged the ticket," another sneered. Rachel kept walking. Back in economy, Tracy pointed to the very last row. "There. That's where you belong," she said with venom. "Enjoy it." Rachel sat without a word. But inside a storm raged. Her hands trembled. Her heart pounded. The injustice, the betrayal, it stung far worse because it wasn't coming from strangers. It was coming from the airline she helped build. From the very policy she had signed. She pulled out her phone. Ethan's contact was still at the top of her screen. "We need to talk. Urgent. Something happened." She hit send. Tracy passed by again, throwing a crumpled blanket onto her lap like tossing food to a stray dog. "Don't expect champagne back here," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Laughter followed. Rachel took a deep breath. Her hands rested again on the silver bracelet. She had promised her grandmother that she'd never let the world make her bitter. But she also promised she'd never let it get away with cruelty unchecked. She didn't need revenge. She needed change. And by the time this flight was over, the cruel laughs that followed her to seat 32C would become the first echoes of a movement no one saw coming. Because Rachel wasn't just any passenger. She was Rachel Carter, co-founder of Ether Air. And she was done staying quiet. The rest of the flight was an exercise in restraint. Rachel sat quietly in seat 32C, her shoulders back, her chin up, but her spirit battered. The same faces that had laughed at her now glanced her way with a mix of curiosity and contempt. Some, like the couple a few rows ahead, Greg and Lisa Vaughn, even whispered loud enough for her to hear. Lisa was holding up her phone, filming again. She looked so pathetic sitting back there. Like a kid caught sneaking into a gala, she snickered. "Let's call it. From first class to last row, watch the fall." Rachel clenched her jaw. She didn't respond. Lisa didn't stop. She thought she could trick us all. Pretending to belong among real people. I mean, come on. She panned the phone to Rachel's backpack. "Look at that thing. You think she even owns a suitcase?" Rachel stayed still, hands folded tightly in her lap. Then came Greg's booming voice. "I'll bet she doesn't even have a job. Probably some activist trying to stir up attention. You know how they are." The word hung in the air. But racial slurs didn't always have to be explicit. Sometimes they were coded, implied, sharper than anything spelled out. Rachel inhaled slowly, keeping her tears locked away. They weren't for now. They'd come later maybe. But not here. Not in front of them. Meanwhile, Lisa was still posting. She had no idea that the woman she mocked would soon become the most talked about figure on social media, just not in the way she expected. The cameras might be pointed at Rachel now, but soon the lens would turn. On Lisa. On Greg. On Miranda, Tracy, and Logan. And on every face that sneered and looked away when they should have spoken up. An hour into the flight, the turbulence began, not in the air but online. Ethan Carter had received the message. He was in a meeting at Ether Air's headquarters when his phone buzzed. He saw Rachel's name, read the text, and quietly excused himself. His face turned to stone. By the time Rachel landed in Seattle, the wheels were already in motion. But she didn't know that yet. All she felt was exhaustion. As the plane taxied to the gate, Miranda's voice came over the intercom, dripping with professional politeness. "Thank you for flying Ether Air. First-class passengers may disembark first. Economy passengers, please remain seated. Rachel stayed seated. She didn't want to push past them. Not yet. As the plane emptied, Lisa stood up and took one last video over her shoulder. There she is, she whispered gleefully, aiming the camera at Rachel. The fraud. The actress. The liar. Rachel met Lisa's eyes. Just once. Calm. Silent. But that one look carried the weight of thunder. Lisa's smirk faltered. Rachel exited the plane last. Tracy stood at the cabin door, pretending not to notice her. Maybe take the bus next time, Miranda said under her breath, barely concealing her contempt. Rachel didn't respond. But her silence wasn't defeat, it was fuel. And her next steps would be seismic. Outside the terminal, the air was cool and damp. She paused, phone in hand. The notifications had started. Messages from friends, board members, investors. And now strangers. The video had gone viral. Not just Lisa's clip, but the story behind it. Someone on the flight had recognized Rachel. A quiet ally. They had seen what happened and, anonymously, uploaded their own video, with the caption, "This woman isn't a fraud. She's Rachel Carter, co-founder of Ether Air." It was already trending. Rachel's hands trembled again, but this time it wasn't shame. It was the first breath of justice. She opened her phone, tapped a voice note and sent it to Ethan. "Let's meet tomorrow. I want a full board meeting. And I want it public. No more hiding. No more letting prejudice whisper in polite tones." It was time to speak. The next morning, the towering glass of Ether Air's headquarters gleamed under the cloudy Seattle sky. Inside, tension crackled in the air like static before a lightning strike. Every top executive, senior board member, and department head had received the same unexpected message. Emergency all-staff meeting. Top floor. 9 a.m. Mandatory. No one knew the full reason. Not yet. But the whispers had begun. They'd seen the video. They'd read the headlines. And now they were about to witness the fallout. The grand conference room buzzed with unease. At the front, Miranda Kane sat with perfect posture, flanked by Tracy Wells and Logan Pierce. Their uniforms were pressed, their faces blank, but their eyes betrayed them. There was no smugness today. Just fear. Quiet, gnawing fear. Tracy leaned over, whispering with a forced calm, "Do you think she's really his wife?" Logan didn't answer. His jaw was tight. His hands fidgeted under the table. He already knew the answer. Then the room fell silent. The door opened. Ethan Carter walked in. Tall, commanding, his presence was magnetic. The air shifted. No one had ever seen him like this. Expression unreadable, cold, deliberate. Behind him, Rachel stepped in. She wore the same ivory linen dress. No designer blazer. No entourage. Just Rachel, calm, poised, and unshakable. Gasps rippled across the room. Miranda's face drained of color. Tracy's mouth opened slightly. Logan stiffened in his seat. Rachel Carter. The woman they had humiliated in public. The woman they had dismissed, mocked, degraded. And the woman who owned 40% of the airline they worked for. Ethan stood behind the podium. His eyes scanned the room. I assume by now many of you have seen the video circulating online. What you may not know is that the woman in that video, the one your employees ridiculed, humiliated, and publicly insulted, is my wife. You could hear a pin drop. He turned to Rachel and gestured. But more importantly, she is the co-founder of Ether Air, and the heart behind our company's mission of equality, respect, and service. Rachel stepped forward. Her voice was gentle but unwavering. "I didn't come here to punish anyone," she began. "But I will not allow what happened to me to happen to another person, ever again." She placed a thick binder on the podium. "This is a report I compiled last night. It contains 27 documented cases of racial profiling and mistreatment by Ether staff over the past 6 months." The board members leaned in, stunned. Some of those cases were quietly dismissed. Some passengers never even complained. They were too ashamed, too tired of fighting. Just like I almost was yesterday. Miranda, Tracy, and Logan sat frozen. Every eye in the room was on them now. Rachel's voice sharpened, but she didn't raise it. "We preach respect. We claim inclusion. But on our planes, passengers are still judged by the color of their skin, the cut of their clothes, the style of their hair. That ends today." The room held its breath. "I am proposing immediate reforms," Rachel continued. "Mandatory anti-discrimination training. A review of every employee complaint in the past year. And clear, public consequences for violations of our core values." The board didn't object. They applauded. One by one the directors stood. A senior woman said, "You have our full support, Mrs. Carter. It's time we live the values we claim." Another added, "We failed you. But we won't fail the next Rachel Carter." Rachel gave a single nod, then stepped back. Ethan looked directly at the trio in the front row. "Effective immediately," he said, "Miranda Kane is relieved of her leadership duties. Tracy Wells and Logan Pierce are reassigned to roles where they will directly answer to our new anti-discrimination task force." The three said nothing. They couldn't. The verdict had been delivered. But this wasn't just justice, it was transformation. Rachel had entered that room as a victim. She left it as a leader of a movement. 3 months passed like a storm receding from a coastline, leaving wreckage behind but also fertile ground for something new to grow. Inside Ether Air, change was no longer a policy. It was a movement. The Respect Beyond Appearance campaign launched just days after Rachel's address, beginning with sweeping reforms across the company. Mandatory training sessions, real accountability, and a new employee-led ethics committee, all under Rachel's watchful, resolute eye. The flight attendants who had once mocked her now sat in front-row seats, not to serve but to listen, to learn. Miranda Kane, once the authoritative head of cabin crew, now answered phones in the customer complaints division. Every call she picked up was a reminder of the values she had violated. Tracy Wells returned to flight duty, this time exclusively in economy class. Gone was the prideful tilt in her chin. In its place, a quiet humility. One passenger, recognizing her from the viral video, refused a drink and said, "You don't get to smile at me now." Tracy nodded quietly, accepting it. And Logan Pierce, the man who once threatened Rachel with security, now loaded baggage in the rain. One day after slipping on the tarmac, he sat beside a cracked suitcase and wept, not from pain but from realization. Every one of them was living the consequences. Outside the company, the world had taken notice. Rachel's speech to Ether Air staff had been recorded and released. Her calm voice, her unwavering demand for dignity and equality, resonating with millions. It wasn't just a corporate story anymore. It was human. It was viral. And it had sparked a much larger conversation. Hashtags like #JusticeForRachel, #EndAirlineBias, and #RespectBeyondAppearance flooded social media. People from all walks of life, passengers, employees, strangers, shared their own stories of humiliation, of exclusion, of being seen as less than. Rachel had become more than a co-founder. She was a symbol. One morning, as sunlight broke over the Seattle skyline, Rachel arrived at the airport once again. Her steps were lighter this time. Her linen dress fluttered at her knees as she approached the check-in desk. Maya, the same ground staff member who had watched the storm unfold from the sidelines, looked up and smiled, this time not out of politeness, but from a place of genuine admiration. "Welcome back, Mrs. Carter," she said warmly. "It's an honor to have you on board today." Rachel nodded, gratitude in her eyes. "It's good to be back." As she boarded the aircraft, she paused at the entrance. There, standing by the doorway, was Logan. He stood tall, shoulders squared, but his eyes carried none of the cold arrogance from before. They were soft, sincere. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "thank you for giving people like me a second chance." Rachel looked at him for a moment and offered a small, knowing smile. "It's not about second chances," she replied. "It's about what you do with them." Inside the cabin, she took her seat in first class, again seat 2A, the same seat that once became a stage for humiliation. This time it was quiet, warm, respectful. Across the aisle, a young black woman in simple jeans and a t-shirt entered nervously, holding a boarding pass that read "First Class." Rachel watched as a flight attendant rushed forward to assist her, gently helping her store her carry-on and offering a drink with a welcoming smile. No stares. No whispers. Just kindness. Rachel smiled softly, resting her hand on her grandmother's bracelet. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had begun to shift, and she had been the one to push it. As the plane lifted into the clouds, Rachel looked out the window, Seattle's skyscrapers shrinking below, the horizon wide and limitless ahead. She knew the journey wasn't over, but she also knew something deeper. True power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in quietly, in flats, in linen, in truth, and it leaves behind a legacy loud enough to echo for generations. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to this powerful story of justice, dignity, and transformation. At True Echo, we believe real change starts with real stories, and the courage to tell them. Remember this: silence is not peace. Peace is what comes after we speak. This story moved you, share it. Comment below with your thoughts. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that expose injustice, uplift voices, and echo the truth the world needs to hear.